rationalist or a romantic? A rationalist. Everything about his autobiography, which is the story of his life, is really not about Franklin. It's about how Franklin did stuff, how Franklin did useful things. He says, I wrote this thing so that my posterity will know where they came from. That was one reason. He said, I'm not going to tell you I didn't do this for self-aggrandizement. I didn't do this to show off, because nobody would believe me. Everybody knows I'm a pretty vain guy, so okay, I wrote it to show off as well. But I mainly wrote it so that people could see how I did things, they could avoid my mistakes, and they could improve on my method. If everybody has to solve the problem starting from scratch, society never moves ahead. But the reason we do move ahead so much is that we build on the successes of the past. We see where people in the past failed, we see where they succeeded, we see ways of improving on their successes. Franklin is always applying the scientific method, and there's no better example of that than the street sweeping incident. He decides, now this is basically Franklin's method, and you know that Franklin has a method for everything he does. Only Franklin would have a method for achieving moral perfection. And in fact, Franklin's method works. You take that thing where you list the virtues. If Franklin were alive today, he would be a billionaire in the self-help industry. Because Franklin's method is the basis of every 12-step or 9-step or 27-step program there is. There would be Franklin rehab centers everywhere in the world. And Franklin would help you rehab from anything. It wouldn't have to be drugs or alcohol. It would be anything, because if you use Franklin's method, it works. You write down what you think a good person is, what those characteristics are. You take them one at a time. Why do you take them one at a time? Why don't you try to improve all your faults? Well, maybe you only have a few faults. I have so many. Franklin had so many. He knew that would make you too scattered. You'd fail too often. You notice when he lists his faults, he lists the characteristics he wants to achieve. What does he put last? Chastity and humility. It was on the quiz. Humility, he said, look, I'm a vain guy. If I ever got humble, I'd be proud of it. And chastity, well, if we get a chance, we'll look at Franklin's sex life, but he led the league in mistresses and illegitimate children. His wife adopts 3 of them. They're more than probably, and the founding fathers weren't just called the founding fathers because they were men. They sired a lot of children. Of course, you have to remember the time, what marriages and stuff were about, and you saw it already in Old Mistress's Apologue. Those are the 2 hardest things. Well, why does he put them first? Because will he achieve it right away? Will he have success with those things right away? No. Instead, he puts easy things in the beginning. And he gets some successes, and they convince him that the method will work. And then he moves on to the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. And every 13 weeks, he hits chastity and humility, and he has a bad week. But he's probably still a little more chaste than he would have been otherwise, and maybe a little bit more humble for that week. But if he had started out with those, he would have failed at them, he would have been depressed, he would have abandoned the method. And you notice he continues to, he improves on the method. He sets up a chart, one virtue at a time. Whenever he fails, he makes a little black mark. What was the problem? Too many black marks. When he'd go to the next week, he had to erase them all. He was tearing up the paper. So he stops using paper. He uses horn, which is about the equivalent of plastic. And that way he could make the marks, and they could wet them and rub them all off. So he improved on that method. When he wanted to get a social change made, he generally followed this method. He would write a letter anonymously to his newspaper and others, identifying the problem. Why anonymously? I don't know if Franklin's the one who said it, but nothing succeeds like success. One of the reasons Franklin could get so much stuff done is because he had gotten so much stuff done in the past. He hardly ever seemed to fail. You identify the problem anonymously because if other people write in and go, that's not a problem, what an idiot would think this was a problem. What does Ben do? He just pretends it wasn't him. Yeah, I don't know who wrote that in. That was really silly. Not a problem at all. If people write in and say it's a problem, he sends another letter anonymously proposing possible solutions. Why does he do that anonymously? Franklin talked about the Socratic method. He said initially he loved to argue. He just loved yelling at people and get excited, and he loved to win. And he'd win the argument, and every time they had a vote, he'd lose the vote. And finally, a minister of his said, that's because you're so arrogant, nobody can stand to admit that you were right, so they'll vote to their own detriment rather than have you have a victory. And he said, from then on, I never said this is how it is. I said, it seems to me, or better yet, I use Socratic method. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? What do you think of that? By a series of questions, he would lead you to the conclusion. Now, when you go to a public meeting and point out a problem, who gets put in charge of the committee to solve it? You do almost 100% of the time. Franklin wants change made. He doesn't want to spend all his time making the change. So Franklin, after writing anonymously, would go to somebody and say, what do you think about that street sweeping idea? Well, let me ask you this. You got a lot of dust around your place of business? Oh yeah, it gets on the clothes and stuff. I'm brushing them off all the time in order to sell them. You got dust at home? Yeah. What's your wife do about it? She sweeps it up. Sweeps it up. Yeah, sweeps it up. What do you think? Do you think streets could be swept? I suppose they could. That's brilliant. You should go to the public meeting and say we should have the streets swept. And of course that guy goes, puts his hand up, we got a problem, I think the streets could be swept. Who gets put in charge of organizing the street sweeping? The guy that Franklin sent there. Franklin, and of course after a while, Franklin knows he's going to get credit, because sooner or later somebody's going to say, that street sweeping thing, that was pretty smart. How'd you think of that? I was standing around talking to Franklin. Yeah, you know, it's amazing how many things get done here when somebody is standing around talking to Franklin. And if it fails, Franklin just walks away from it. He doesn't have to take any responsibility for it. Starts out with anonymous letters, never gets it until it's something credible. He never makes sure that it gets assigned to him. Now, when he's going to have the street, think of the street sweeping the streets in England. He thinks the stuff can be swept up. Okay, scientific method. You observe. You identify the problem, you make possible solutions. We can sweep it up. Then what do? What's the fourth step in the scientific method? You test it. So he says there's a little old lady sweeping 1 square yard in front of his house and hoping to get a hand up. He employs her to sweep the street. He gives her a shilling. She comes back way before he expected her to. Does he take her word for it that she's done? No, a rationalist has to have evidence. He sends his servant. The servant comes back and says, it's done perfectly. Does Franklin hire her then to sweep the streets? What does he do? He hires a young man. He says, if an old lady can do it in this amount of time, a young man can do it in half. Now, a romantic would say, what a despicable thing you did. This lady worked hard and you didn't reward her. This lady was sick and coughing. She needed the money. She didn't get it. She did a good job. You didn't give her the job sweeping the streets. You used her. What would Franklin say? I didn't promise her a career in street sweeping. Look, everybody came out ahead here. I gave her more money to sweep the street than she could possibly have earned begging. So she came out ahead. I never promised her any more than that. I promised her a shilling. She swept the street. She did it. I gave her the shilling. I didn't cheat her. The job was never hers. The job could never have been hers. In order to get the street sweeping done, it's going to be by subscription. Everybody's going to have to contribute. If I hire an army of old ladies, I'm going to have to charge this much. People probably won't sign up for that. If I hire a bunch of young men, they will sign up for it. Let me finish this last point and then we'll go. So it won't even be done if it's done by old ladies. Plus, if we got to employ somebody, why is it better to employ young men than it is to employ old women? Why is it better for society?
Keep them occupied.
Keeps them occupied. If you have young men out of work, they probably have families. What will they do if they can't find work? Steal. They'll turn to armed robbery. Very few little old ladies are going to turn to armed robbery. And you'll catch them anyway because they're slow. Children, families, the man all profit. The little old lady can still make money begging. The young man can't. Everybody comes out ahead. Okay, next week we'll look at more Franklin and his rationalism and some of his romanticism.